So I'm going to stand here so I can see it as I read it. And I'm starting right from the beginning. So, The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt. All too human. Introduction to a life. Too soon, too angry, too smart, too stupid, too honest, too snobbish, too Jewish, not Jewish enough, too loving, too hateful, too manlike, not manlike enough. What follows is a story of a life of a person called Hannah Arendt, born into a lost world, in a lost country, in another era. A refugee philosopher, thinker whose name may sound familiar. In the end, and in the beginning, remains the question, why did this person, arguably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, renounce philosophy? And despite that, does her thinking offer a viable way for humanity to move forward? The Sorrows of Young Hannah. Königsberg, East Prussia, 1912. The whole wide world, mama, papa, grandpa, music, birds, plays, pictures, toys, cookies, color, light, sound, touch, and best of all, delicious, delicious stories I could eat till their juice ran down my cheeks. If I looked at something and I loved it, I could figure it out. And if I couldn't totally figure it out, the more I felt it and its wonder as it unfolded, it became even more. For instance, the first time Mozart, it was pretty, then the walls in his music kind of connected unto each other perfectly on a beautiful window. Shot a rainbow to another wall, dancing glow. Again, I'd shout. Magic Mama would revive Mozart, but poor Papa, he's coming back again from the clinic tomorrow. When he's there, sometimes he's in the bright white room with the orange flowers, but sometimes he's in the dark gray room in the oily canvas jacket with chains on it, sweating. Why, how, what? I know that the answer has to be somewhere out there in the wonderful wide world. I know it. I'm 5 years old. The streets are 400. I'm skipping home from school, and I'm happy. Step on a crack, break Mama Martha's back. Joy, happy music. Except when one of those new automobile machines start honking at me. Honk, honk. Hey, kid, get your head out of the clouds. Did horses honk at Immanuel Kant when he walked down Kaiserstrasse? He's from Königsberg, too, like me. Bing. Immanuel Kant, 1724, 1804, German philosopher from Königsberg who pretty much wrote the book on modern philosophy. He put the human mind at the center of experience. Hey, Kant, get your head out of the clouds. That crazy Kant is always lost in thinking. What good is thinking? Chickens are what matters. They probably did, but I got to get home. Mama's waiting with cocoa. Step on two cracks, break Papa Paul's back. I'm interrupted by Hans from school, but he's being weird. Hey, you. Me? You. But Hans, you know my name. It's Hannah. You are a Jew. But I'm Hannah. Yeah, I know, Hannah, but my papa says you're really a Jew. Is that good? Jew. Jew. I run home, thinking of Mama who's waiting for me. Mama and Papa are so wonderful. They even take me to these really fun protests. There's supposed to be one tonight, I think. Mama always writes about me in her Unserkind, a diary she keeps about who I am. And this says, my Hanashka, my sunshine child. I can't wait till I can read better so I can peek at it. But not now. I'm too sad. Mama, and then Hans started yelling, Jew. What is it, Mama? Jew. Yes, we are Jews. It's a religion, like Lutheran. How? We don't go to a Lutheran church. Mama, is it good, Jew? But Hans said, Hannah, remember, if anyone ever says anything like that, be proud. If one is attacked as a Jew, one must defend oneself as a Jew. Now do your homework.
I love that chapter. It's also really fun to read someone's work and then see them read the visual. I was watching all of your faces. Okay, so this is also from my book that's coming up. It's called Good Talk, and it's going to be out in March. And I'm also starting at the beginning, so you don't really need much context for this. Chapter 1, 2014. The trouble began when my 6-year-old son, Z, became obsessed with Michael Jackson. What is obsessed? Like into. Really, really into? Yes. I'm obsessed. 6-year-old plus Michael Jackson obsession equals a lot of questions. Who taught him to dance? Is that how people really walk on the moon? What is the Jackson 5? Did he lose his other glove? What is a LaToya? Is his skin like my skin? Is his hair like my hair? At first, they were pretty basic. Who is better, Michael Jackson or Michael Jordan? That's apples and oranges. No. Michael Jackson is a human singer, and Michael Jordan is a human... Oh my God, stop. Michael Jackson. And then they weren't. Was Michael Jackson brown or was he white? Well, he was black, but his skin was brown, and then it turned white. He turned white? Yes. Are you going to turn white? No. Am I going to? No. Daddy? Daddy's already white. But was he always? I'm East Indian, and my husband is Jewish. We've lived on the same block in Brooklyn for almost 2 decades. A lot of mixed-race kids live on our block. A lot of everybody lives on our block. Do I look like Nick? Little. He's Russian, black. What about Claudine? She's Korean and Chinese. What about the guy on the corner who's always falling asleep while he's standing? The who? Oh, yeah, no, you don't look like him either. Indians are not very cool. That's not true. Look at Bollywood. What? And Mindy Kaling. Who? Gandhi. Gandhi is super cool. What did he sing? Can I make my hair like Michael's? No. Why not? Because that's cultural appropriation. What? That's using someone else's ethnicity to make a fashion statement. What? You'll look silly. Oh, okay. Mommy, I have changed my name to the 6th Jackson. Wait, really? I'm supposed to say, this is my son, the 6th Jackson? No. Just say, this is the 6th Jackson, and then I will show them my moves, and then they will understand. Damn. New color theory, now with more 6-year-old. When I am with you, people think I look like you, and when I am with Daddy, people think I look like him, except in the summer, because that is when I am super deluxe, extra brown, and Daddy isn't, because maybe he drank too much milk when he was little, so I should probably only ever drink chocolate milk so I can look like Michael Jackson, right? Nice try. What did Michael Jackson like being better, brown or white? He liked both. But what did he like better? Neither. But what, can we please stop talking about this? What color was he when he sang Man in the Mirror? I'm going to turn myself white. No, you cannot decide to be white. It doesn't work like that. And I will have red lips, and my nose will look like it's falling off, and I will scare kids, even though I love them. Nope. Every time Z asked me a question, I would remember all the times I had asked similar questions growing up, all the things I'd been told, all the things that still didn't make sense. Why? Why? But why? Why? In August, an unnamed teenager named Michael Brown was shot and killed by a Missouri cop. By fall, protests against police brutality were shutting down the streets of New York. Is it bad to be brown? What? No. It's great being brown. We look good in colors. We have history. We don't get skin cancer as easily. Why are you yelling at me? I don't know. The TV said the police killed a kid named Ferguson because he was brown. His name was Michael Brown. He was black. He was killed in a town called Ferguson. By a white policeman. Yes. Ferguson is far away, right? Are white people afraid of brown people? Sometimes. How do you know? What? How do you know which ones are afraid of you? Mommy, how do you don't always. Is Daddy afraid of us? No. No. Wait, he asked you that? If I was afraid of him? So I told him no, and that sometimes the news is hard to understand. And my son? What? My son asked if I was afraid of him? Yes. What do we do? I don't know. Sometimes You don't know how confused you are about something important until you try explaining it to someone else. For years, I'd been telling myself that America was changing for the better, that the pain and confusion I'd felt growing up here would soon be a thing of the past. Hadn't we just elected our first black president? Didn't that mean that those of us who'd always been treated like we were suspicious or invisible or just lucky to be allowed in were finally going to feel like we were safe and welcome and loved? Now, every question Z asked me made me realize the growing gap between the American I'd been raised to believe in and the one rising fast all around us. I kept thinking if I could go back in time and make sense of all the things I'd been told growing up, maybe I'd be able to give Z better answers, maybe even find a way toward that better country. Soon, though, with news of the Black Lives Matter movement flooding our televisions and the rise of Donald Trump, I would have just as many questions as he did. All right.
So we're supposed to interview each other.
Yes. Well, I have 1,000 questions for you. Can I start?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
It's like the
and
SAT.
then you guys will also get your turn. But one of the things that I kept thinking when I read this book, I kept kind of turning pages and gasping out loud because it felt very of this moment. Do you know how sometimes you guys are reading things right now and you're sort of like, whoa, and a little bit of it is history is sort of repeating itself, but some of it really feels like, whoa, like this is exactly what I needed in this moment. So I wanted to ask you, when did you know that you were going to write this book? Like what year did you kind of start working on it? And then what was happening in the course of your writing it? What was happening in the present day time?
So I started writing the book at the end of 2015. And I don't know why. I mean, I kind of know why. I was very interested in philosophy. I wanted to try and take complex ideas and explain them in pictures. I thought Hannah Arendt was like really, really cool. Everything about her biography blew me away. She hung out with all these cool people in Weimar Republic, you know, Kurt Weill. I mean, I just loved all that. And then as things continued to unwind in a crazy fashion, I found myself reading and rereading her writing, and it was like a life preserver to me. And as things got weirder and weirder, I found that everything that she was writing about in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, and her life was like, it's literally, the image is a life preserver, like I'm on the side of a boat, but it's like a very beautiful life preserver. It's like a happy, you know, blow up water wings of, you know, the Ramones life preserver that I really like. And it was comforting. And I feel like with Hannah Arendt, I kind of misquoted the old New York Roach Motel ad. Once you check into Hannah Arendt, you never check out. And it's like everything that she was writing, just, it gave me comfort. It really, really did.
It's funny because that was my experience reading it. I marked pages throughout where, and you know this already, but I was actually rationing the end of the book because you know how right before you go to sleep, maybe everyone does this, you're sort of like, the world. And so in reading this, I found that I was so comforted in a way by her words and what I was reading that I was doing that thing where I was like, I don't really want this to be over yet. I don't want this place to end. And so I read the last pages on the subway on the way here. Oh. And I was like borderline weeping on the subway, not out of like sadness, but out of that feeling of like, it feels really good to be held right now by these ideas and this moment and the idea that someone has sort of thought through it in a way that is nuanced and complex, you know?
Well, I'm really glad you used the term, and I've got 1,000 questions for you, so I'll get to you in a minute, but I'm really glad that you used the word thought through, because that was something that, you know, I got into her personality, and she felt that if we can think through, that's the only thing we can do, is think properly. Mm-hmm. Think from the point of view of other people. You know, all that entailed, and it's interesting, I was talking to somebody before, and the book was translated into French, and it just came out. And the French translator, what does this think through? What does this mean? And I'm like, what do you mean, you know? And I'm going back to my 7th grade French, and I'm like, well, it's kind of like ordering at a restaurant. No, I didn't know. I tried to explain it to her. And then I was at a German conference, and I was talking to some Germans about graphic novels, and think through that. There's a German word for that.
Of course.
Right? Of course, 4 pages long. No, there is a word. And I think this notion of facing reality that she had. So for me, you know, it's interesting. I think I was attracted to the personality, and then the politics came out of the person. I looked at her very much as a courageous person. I don't necessarily want to say a hero, maybe a tragic hero or something like that, but I was smitten by her personality. And then out of that, and her life, which was true. And she made great sacrifices, you know. A principle isn't a principle unless it costs you something. And it cost her a lot. And then she gave us this gift of her life, which wasn't perfect. So I'm so delighted to hear that you felt that way, because, you know, she faced reality head on, no matter what the headwinds were. And I think, what was it? She died in 1975. It's almost 50 years ago. And how could you be so resonant? Because unfortunately, that's how the world rolls. Observation, not a question. Interesting to have done both done our first chapters. And one of the things that really got me about your book, and this maybe isn't even a question, but they were both child narration, and they both accelerated to a point of a big unanswered question. And I think it was interesting that obviously you start at the beginning, but you know, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about another book that I really like called Arab of the Future by Riyad Sattouf. I don't know if you've read it. And he does child narration too in a really, really interesting fashion. So I just thought that our approaches, I wonder if you just speak a little bit about, because I think that child narration, and also, I didn't realize this, but the maternal voice, and I'm just, you know, it was very interesting. And in Hannah Arendt's life, her mother was like gum on her shoe. She could not shake her mother, you know, which I related.
The mother's a gem.
I related to that. I thought
Yeah.
it was so interesting that here's this hero, you know, doing all this stuff and schlepping her mother with her everywhere. I could kind of relate to that.
Her mother's one of those mothers that's, I mean, I guess most of our mothers are this person that stubbornly, no matter what, remains your mother. You know what I mean? Like air and space and time can bend, and there is your mother.
So, but anyways, tell me a little bit about your strategy and that. Yeah.
Okay, so I actually also started writing my book in 2015, and I did it because the way that so what happened, as you can see, is my son got super obsessed with Michael Jackson, and we decided to get him all of the albums because we thought we were geniuses. We're like, oh, he's not going to skip the music. We'll just sort of cage him in this way. He will have to listen to the songs, all of them. You can't pick up the needle, whatever thing we thought. Not realizing that when you give a child those huge pictures of Michael Jackson's album, and that child is somewhere between his brown mother and his white father, he's going to be looking at them and kind of saying, like, how did this happen? So those questions he were asking, I didn't make up any of those questions. All of the questions are exactly what he was asking. But it was crazy because he was asking me these questions, and then like the one about are white people afraid of us? That was just on the subway, actually. We were on the subway, we were going home, and it was Brooklyn and crowded, and like chirpy little person, like, are white people afraid of brown people? And the whole subway's like, aren't it? And there's a woman standing next to us, African-American woman's like, And then there was this like white hipster couple that are apologizing with their entire faces, like, we are so sorry for the pain that we have caused this child. You know, is this, and normally what I would do with that is I would make that into an essay, right? Like, okay, I'm going to write this, I'm going to make it into an essay, and I'm going to break this down in some way. And when I tried to do that, because the world has was in that moment also becoming what it is now, I understood that every sentence I wrote down in which I tried to contextualize it was a sentence that someone could rip me apart with. And they were going to say, I don't believe her because of this, or I don't believe her, oh, doesn't she precious about her child, and oh, isn't this so adorable, and she's manipulating us, because every moment of racial pain was being recontextualized as a manipulation of white Americans. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. Every time I tried to write something, I felt myself breaking. And so I drew him and I drew me, and I took those Michael Jackson albums off his shelf and I put them down on my kitchen table, and I cut us out of the paper, and then I cut word balloons and I put them down on the kitchen table, and I stood over and I took the pictures. And the reason that I did that was so I could just preserve his voice so that somebody could hear it the way I did. So they weren't actually hearing it as, this is a mother telling you what her child, but actually just hear the conversation.
Yeah.
Just hear it.
I think so. That's really a really interesting story, because it gets to what, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot and thinking about is, why do picture stories work differently than stories,
Yeah.
or whatever you call it?
Yep.
And I think it's because you experience them. It's like you witness them. And when you say contextualize and all those kinds of things, no, you're putting me in. It's like I say to people, and I'm curious because we're both into dialogue and into writing, but how the pictures work to break that barrier. And my real litmus test for this is, the Bazooka Joe gum that you get that's really bad and breaks your teeth? And it has a little comic in it,
Yes.
like 2 frames long.
Yeah.
You get into it. It's almost impossible not to look at a comic and get into it. So I think the fact that you felt compelled to put images to it to make it come alive as a scene is really interesting. And I'll say there were a couple of other instances in your book, and this is what is so interesting about this medium, I think, and it's so cool that it's kind of growing up in a way that, people are saying, there's a lot of people who are really into it. Like, I go to Quimby's bookstore in Chicago, and it's like the mecca of this. And I was talking to the person who runs it, who I know. I'm like, do you know people have never read graphic novels before? And she's like, you're kidding. Where do they live? Get them away from me. But there are a lot of people who haven't, because you experience it. So there were 3. I just pulled out a couple of scenes because what I think is really interesting is how you get emotion from pictures and words together. So there were 3 that I just remembered in your book that were very, very powerful to me. One was when, and I'm not going to say you, I'm going to say she, goes to the Daughters of American Revolution essay contest as a little girl.
Right.
And it's just, the pictures tell it. And you feel it because of the way you did the pictures. The other one was, and these are emotional. These are highly emotional scenes, and it's kind of like I'm pulling out scenes that really move me. The whole one with the dad and the weed.
Yes, right.
Which is already kind of interesting. Like, I could see how, like, I'm going to do an essay about getting my dad weed when he was sick. Okay, that's funny. But then when you put it into the pictures, it took on another dimension. And then the whole episode that I think every single one of us who's a writer in New York has had, which is the crazy Park Avenue person who wants you to help them ghostwrite their novel.
Yes, yeah.
Like,
have you had
we've
that
all
person?
had that.
Stay away. You don't need it. If you haven't had that one, you don't need it.
When you do it with the pictures,
yeah,
it's different. Can you talk
That's
about how
really-
that felt
so
different for you?
I'm so glad they're emotional. So as you guys saw, I don't change the expressions on. They are. I use them like paper dolls, right? I make pictures of people and then I use them, and they are only front facing. I tried to draw people from the side and it was terrible, but I do that because part of that is to me about performing racial pain, which is the thing I'm exhausted by in the first place. And I realized that was performing pain in general. My editors kept saying, can you, when something really sad happens, can you just have like one Mira that sort of has a tear? And I was like tear Mira? You want me to make tear Mira? And they were like, yeah, or like wince Mira. And I was like, why wouldn't there be why wouldn't there be all the expressions then? Like, you want the expressions? And he said, yeah. And I was like, why? And he said, because it's really jarring to see the words and not have the expression. I was like, yeah, and then you have to hold it. If I don't emote, if I don't make those characters emote, then you have to hold it, right? Then that's on you to do that. So when you're bringing this up, though, the idea of what is different about a visual book, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is that I don't know that someone that is not you, I know there are scholars that would pick up Hannah Arendt's work and kind of look through it right now and say, what is there? But I don't think most Americans would go looking for her in this moment, but I think you brought her out in this very specific way that feels both kind of prescient because of the moment that we're in, but also helpful. And were you aware when you were building it that it was going to be helpful in this way?
No.
No.
But I knew she was really cool. And I knew that she was an amazing thinker. And I knew that she didn't lie. And I thought,
alone.
that's really nice. And I knew that she went through hell, not once, but twice, but 3 times, and maybe more. And she lived in a world of words. I mean, she was a visual, sensual person, obviously, but she's not around anymore. She left a lot of words, and I had to look for pictures to contextualize her in terms of what did the Café Romanche look like in 1933 in Berlin before the Reichstag fire? What did it look like the night the Reichstag burned? What were they reading? What were they smoking? What movies were going on? Mm-hmm. Because I was writing a biography, a history, but biography and history is boring because we know the ending.
Yeah.
See, in your book, we don't know the ending because we do now because we'll read it or whatever, but you don't know it. In my book, you kind of know the ending. Yeah. So I had to say, who's the person? But I did know enough that, I had read enough and seen enough that I was just like, wow, it was like discovering John Coltrane for the first time. It's like, she didn't blow a bad note.
Okay, that's amazing because that's the dialogue reads like music. Her dialogue specifically is really fascinating. How did you get that? I feel like you nailed her voice so kind of specifically.
I had to channel her as a character. I mean, I say this is a story about a person named Hannah Arendt. I mean, my thing was going in, love her, fantastic person. She died in 1975. So I had to kind of like re-inflate her into the world. And I took some liberties. I made her talk a little bit like we do because I wanted people to be able to gauge her. But I also got some notes of her character, just like you probably got notes of people's character. Like, she was a snob. She was super smart. She was a beautiful woman. She got hit on a lot. Mm-hmm. She was courageous. I don't know what it is. I don't know what being courageous is. So I had to kind of learn it from what she did. So I was just trying to be as true to her story as she would have wanted. And again, I say she's the gift that keeps giving in a way because she felt that she had a doppelganger, avatar, Rachel Varnhagen, who she spent most of her life trying to write a biography of this person. But it was a fictionalized biography of her because she felt so, in a way, she was posing and answering questions. So I think when I was trying to what would she do? What would I do? I don't know. I don't know if that's a good answer to it. No, but I tried to make her, like, if she did stuff that was fake, probably like what you did with, like, the pictures. Like, if it felt fake to me or too pushed, I took it out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I love that you like the dialogue. The thing that's interesting, did you have, yours was all dialogue.
Yeah, and when I put a lot of, I do best creating when I put really strict limitations on myself, right? Like I think for any creative person, the more restrictions you place, the more you can sort of go wild because you can only work on the tight borders. So my first idea was to write it only in dialogue, never have any narrative, never have any pullback moments.
Mine too.
Yeah,
it was terrible.
Yeah, I know. Because you think, right? You're like, this is the magic thing I can do.
You're like, I'm gonna be on the cover of the New York Times book review. He did it. Yeah. Nope.
No, yeah. It's a really funny thing when something comes naturally to you and then you're like, I should do it all the time. And then you realize after a while, you're like, oh, it's just like tap dancing with a fever across the stage when like the entire room has left because you've now bored them to tears because you've lost them. And I did the same. I had the same idea that like, it's all going to be dialogue, but the other side of that is the book is literally called Good Talk. It's kind of a love letter to the lost art of talking. And every scene in there is a conversation. So if something happened in my life that was not conversation driven, no matter how much it formed my character, I actually left it out. Because I was actually trying to work with the way, that, you know, when, I think talking is just such a funny thing. The idea that we as humans, like, this is the way we communicate. We make sounds with our mouths, and that's supposed to be something that we understand of each other.
Yes.
It's
supposed to have started with singing.
That's what we started doing first?
Yeah, I think we
it.
were singing.
Yeah, I wish we could go back to
But
that.
it's interesting that you bring that up. Yeah, well, not me. But again, Hannah Arendt, The Gift. I mean, so she was, you know, I had to do teach yourself phenomenology because which was tough. But she says that life is really with people and between people. And actions, it's only stuff that we witness. And words are actions. So by using dialogue and scenes, you've really captured that immediate interpersonal experience, which she says is the way that we deal with life. I mean, I think she would really have problems with tweets and anonymous tweets and that sort of stuff. She's all about this. And so I think you captured that, because dialogue, and actually I used this in another talk, is really, really blown away that she was like into Walter Benjamin, because like I was one of that crowd of people who used to go to the St. Mark's, no offense to the Strand, but when the St. Mark's bookstore was there, when the Benjamin books came out, and got them, you know, and read them, you know. And Benjamin said, and she quoted him, truth is predominantly an auditory phenomenon. You know, it's what you hear. So you did that. You showed people talking, and it is strange. And I had a lot of fun writing the dialogue in this, because I learned a lot. I mean, I've written film stuff and stuff like that, but somehow doing it in this context, when you see the people, you realize, and you talk about, it's weird how we make these guttural sounds, and it's weird how anything that we have in here connects to anybody there and has any semblance of truth to it. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah, yeah, and actually just the entire premise of talking, right? You make sounds with your mouth, and somebody else receives those sounds. But in the moment that they are receiving those sounds, they are also thinking what sounds to make back. So how much can they actually hear you anyway, right? Like, how much do we ever really understand each other? That to me was the most
and I think
fascinating part about detailing talking.
Yeah. So yours was kind of like plurality within a family, and hers was two, kind of, but she was trying to take that and push it out into the world.
So I wanted to talk to you about, and I don't think there are any spoilers, because her life is kind of known to people, but there's a really beautiful and haunting moment in this that we talked a little bit about in the context of, we were both talking back there about 9/11. We were both in the city for 9/11. Probably many of you were as well. And I was saying to you, I was 28, I was on my way to work, and the thing that shocked me most in that moment was it was a new job, and I was trying to explain to my boss on the street, I was on my way to work, and this thing happened with the building, and da-da-da, and she was like, well, when are you coming? And I was like, have you turned on the news? That this whole thing has happened? She's like, we're going to have the meeting at 11, and da-da-da-da, and I was sort of like, I don't know what to do with the level of disconnect that's happening now. You had a similar thing, right?
Yeah, my son who was here, I dropped him off at kindergarten, and long story short, my wife called and said a plane hit the World Trade, and I'm like, oh, those damn Piper Cubs, you know, they got to learn how to fly. I mean, I didn't know. And I went downtown to work, and all the cars on the street had their doors open and were playing, you know, the Pentagon, this, that, and I'm like, what the hell? I mean, I had to get to work too, and everyone was working. And there was one TV in the office, and no one knew what was going on. And I realized that must have been what like London in the Blitz was like or something. So ultimately I through the fuzzy TV, you know, that was picking up like WPIX through like a hangar that someone stuck in it, I saw one of the buildings fall down. And I said, this is not good. And I got it. I went down to, I'll never forget, I went down to Madison Avenue and like 28th Street, and I hailed a taxi, got in a cab, went home, picked him up, and went back, and we all sat in the park. And nobody knew what was going on. And that, I used that emotion in the scene when she's in the detention camp, which we had in America, by the way, in Gers, and there's a little confusion because she was doubly damned, okay? She was a German when France was fighting the Germans, and then she was a Jew when the Germans took over France. So at that moment of crossover, I portray it in a somewhat dramatic way, but it's true story. She said, let's go. Yeah. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. And I could understand that because of that moment.
It's a beautiful moment, and because I think many of us we wonder right now, like, when is the let's go movement? Like, when does the let's go moment happen, right? Do you guys ask yourself that? Like, what is the let's go moment? When do we activate? Like, what is the thing that tells you now is the time to move? Now is the time to take a kind of action? Now is the time to motivate in a certain way, even when everyone else is hanging back? What does that feel like? And when I read that in there, I just found it so beautiful and haunting, but also sort of devastating. The idea that there were 6,800 women that
the women who followed the orders,
and
and they did this, and I couldn't have written it unless I was both sides of that conversation.
Okay.
So one side of me was, yeah, I'm that person. Let's get the hell out of Dodge. You know, I'm clear-sighted and heroic, and I would do it. But the other side is, but the police and the people and they wear uniforms, and they're saying, obey us. This is what you must do. Everything's going to be fine. You know, what do you do? You know, in hindsight now, we're like, oh, well, you know, I'd leave. Would you?
Mm-hmm. So where we are now, right? I mean, you can't not think about that.
I haven't seen the news in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows where we are now? But do you find yourself asking yourself that question too? Like, what does it look like to take that kind of action right now? What does it look like? There's no place to walk out of. We're not being held. What does that look like? What does that moment of having the moment of, now is the moment to transform this moment and understand what it is and be someone different in it, right? If that's what it is.
I think that's the question, hopefully, that we're all asking ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's another episode, and these were things that came out of her life. Like, I hewed to the incidents of her life. And in 1933, after the Reichstag fire, literally, Billy Wilder, who was a friend of hers, you know, the guy who did The Apartment, and he did Double Indemnity, probably the greatest screenwriter and director ever, and, you know, said, I'm going. I'm out of here. This is screwed. And her husband at the time said, I'm going. I'm out of here. I'm in Bertolt Brecht's diaries. And she said, I'm staying, I'm working to try and fix things. Right. It's an individual decision, but, you know, and you hear it from a lot of other people, and I listen to a lot of people talking and reading, and for some people the alarm bells are on 10 and have been for the past few months. And it's a question. I think the whole thing of doing this for me has made the question that much more tangible, like that much more real. And my wife is like, let's get cash and sew it into the, you know, the mattresses, and, you know, and you know, one of the things that hit me in doing this book was, and as our national moment accelerated, was, and I don't know if you all felt this, but I really felt it. This edifice, I mean, if you can even think back to before 2016, it's almost hard. It's almost like that was an abyss, really, like Hannah defines. But if you can think back to that, we all kind of know that this edifice is a house of cards. The Constitution's a house of cards. The government's, you know, kind of when I was growing up, it wasn't. It was like, there's the government, there's the flag, there's a car, there's a street, and then all of a sudden, everything, the earth started, it's like I was once in an earthquake. It was actually at the U.S. Open. There was a little ripple of an earthquake in New York. I don't know if you remember. It was about 7 years ago, just as we were moving. The single most unsettling experience I've ever had in my life. To have the earth not be solid. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is. That's the moment. Mm-hmm. Wow. So what do you do? I don't know.
We did not come prepared with that answer, just in case.
Look for the second volume.
Exactly.
There was one thing Oh, I guess we're sort of talking about it, but this is one thing that I think was in both of our books, and I think it kind of relates a little bit maybe to what we're talking about, and sort of if there is a mission for Penn. When does the personal become political? What do you think? I mean, you're kind of asking the same question.
Yeah. So the story that happens in my book is that my son is having that sort of identity crisis, but his grandparents, my husband's parents, become and continue to be ardent Trump supporters. And they're in Florida, and they are Jewish, and that has stayed true despite everything that has continued to happen. They are pretty ardent supporters, meaning holding signs for him on street corners, but also not with almost. They love me intensely. They love my son intensely. I have never felt anything but love from them, and the weird seams that happen in every interracial relationship that America has a fantasy about, as though those seams and borders don't exist.
Are you prepared for Thanksgiving?
Oh, Lord. I mean, what's funny is I gave them the book. I gave them a book a couple of weeks ago, and we had a really wonderful conversation on Sunday that had nothing to do with it. And they said, we're not ready to talk about it. And I said, you don't have to be. And it was so good to talk to them. We hadn't been talking lately because it had gotten so painful. We hadn't been talking also because they had thanked me for not talking about Trump. And then I was like, well, it's cool because I just wrote a whole book. And then I gave them the book, and they read it, and suddenly it didn't, I know they know where I stand. I still know where they stand. I still know that we are not standing on the same side of this thing. But it felt really like a relief to remember.
To what do you attribute the fact that you were able to talk?
Because I love them. I love them. They are both these people that are followers of an ideology that is annihilating me and my kind. And they are people who love me and don't see how they are part of that. And they do love me. And that's the complicated thing. That holding both is really hard. So holding both, sometimes I feel like I'm going to break down the middle, because I think so much of me wants to say, if they do that, then they don't love me. And it is either or. And there's something in me that wants that kind of emotional clarity, because I think it feels really safe to have that clean cut, to be able to say, you've crossed the line and I no longer. But, these are the people that saw me through my dad's death. They're the people that showed up when I said my son got hurt. They were on the first plane. These are the people who will show up. They show up for us. I don't know how to explain what is happening. All I know is that the thing that feels like my resistance in this moment is keeping a space open for that love. I don't know what to make of it yet. And I don't know how to quantify it, and I don't know how to be the political soldier that the world would want me to be in that moment, that has a hard take on them. But I feel like when I fight against the need to say that they are monsters, when I just let the place that loves them love them, I feel like that is claiming something for myself. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for us.
That's great. I mean, I think Hannah also, the battle between sentiment and emotion and politics and writing was a huge thing. And, again, I try and make sense of it. And she, in her, Teutonic way of dividing things up, said there was the private, or the private, the social, and the public. And we have to behave in different ways in those different parts of our life. And that's kind of helpful to me, because she doesn't think that there's a place, believe it or not, as wacky as it seems, for unbridled emotion in the public arena. Now, those of you who have lived through totalitarian or near totalitarian regimes, and we all kind of know what that means, you can understand the temptation and the fear, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't have emotion in the private space. And it's not an easy answer, and like you say, there's no solution. But I think when you use the word monster, That's what she said about Eichmann. She said,
Yeah.
when we make him a monster, then he is absolved of his human deficiencies. He's solved. He's solved. He was a monster. And she lost. And one person said she had a genius for friendship. That was her real genius. And she cut off about 90% of her friends by saying that. So think of somebody who has a genius for friendship, but she had this virulent truth-telling, and she said there's no place for sentiment. So I think, you know, I just think there's not an easy answer, but it's that thinking through, and it's some sort of strange combination. And, you know, look, you know, dividing things up into three doesn't often work, but, it, you know, you find her thinking can give you some guidance, maybe some Thanksgiving tips.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
I have one more question to ask you, which is, what are you reading now? Like, because what you wrote was so helpful. What are you reading? I mean, I'm glad you started reading about Hannah Arendt. What are you doing now? Where are you going right now?
Well, I'm doing work on my next book, unfortunately or fortunately. So I'm reading a lot of things about interwar Europe. But one thing that you know, that sort of seems to be my bailiwick. I thought I was reading something fun. Well, I'm reading about Ernst Lubitsch and his way of storytelling. I guess that sort of goes into Middle European stuff, but I just I love comedy and human interaction and grown-up relationships, and I love subversiveness in society, so that makes me really happy. I'm listening to a lot of music. Actually, I've been getting into I've been listening over and over to Harry Smith's anthology of American folk music, the Weird America stuff. I think we talked about that. Something about hillbilly death songs from the 1920s is just resonating with me. So I don't know. How about you? What are you reading?
Well, you know, it's so funny what you were saying before about what you can do with pictures that you can't do with words, right? I'm trying to actually trace that moment in which words sort of fly into pictures. I'm going to be teaching a class next semester about that transition, that weird transition of when the words start to need the pictures and what that means and what that energy means. So I'm sort of tracing. I'm just doing a funny thing of I'm reading, you know, Gary Steingart's Super Sad True Love Story. There's bits of it in that, and Zinzi Clemens' What We Lose. There's also bits where she's using pictures, and I'm sort of moving gradually. My next one is I'm going to be reading Emile Ferris, which we talked about back there, but just the idea of like, when does the story start to need the picture, and what part of your spirit gets released when the words become lines that you can project an array of emotions onto, and you can live without the borders that words provide. Anyway, so I'm doing a lot of that right now, and that's making me feel pretty good.
I'm going to open it up to questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask, if you want to raise your hand, and I'll give you the mic. We can also let you guys keep talking. That was fine.
So I actually have one question for each of you. Quick questions. Ken, in your research, obviously you had to do a lot of research that got you a lot of answers, but doing research, you oftentimes find questions that just kind of keep growing and don't arrive on an answer. So I'd be really curious to know sort of some of the questions that you either kind of came up with while you were trying to research to write the biography of Hannah Arendt, or like questions about Hannah Arendt's life, or questions that just kind of kept sort of snowballing out of control. And then Mira, so you use like the same sort of puppet drawings, you know, in each frame, but it's always a different photograph. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of what the photographs are. I mean, the Michael Jackson ones are one thing, but what they are, where they come from, and how you understand that to be significant with the relation of the figures to the words.
Well, there are two questions that opened up to me. One is, she never managed to finish her third volume of On Thinking, or on The Life of the Mind, which was going to be on judgment. And actually, she managed to get like one sentence done, and then she died. It's really sad. And God, I wish she could have. I mean, that would have been like. And people have tried to piece it together, and I wish she'd cut down on the cigarettes a little bit and just managed to finish that. And the other one that really vexes me, and I don't have an answer for it really, is what would she make of things today? I just wish she were around. So, those are really vexing to me.
Just to tell you, the first chapter is a little bit of an anomaly in here because the albums exist and because I felt like those best served as the artwork. A lot of other scenes I actually show within, like, moving through a city. Here's an apartment. Here's a place that we're moving. And then I realized that there are times when I can just get kind of wacky with the pictures and just put in like something that makes me feel something behind, just a picture that has a light context with what I'm talking about, but isn't exactly on the nose. I gave myself a really wide berth to kind of just do anything that satisfies my very janky aesthetic. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question for you guys, actually. Where is the disobedience coming from? Who made the connection? Why the reason? I don't see it actually between the books and the toy.
I mean, the title is really coming from sort of the work that they had done. I was really interested in kind of the format of memoir and biography in graphic novel form and kind of twisting that script instead of having it in, just words. Like, what do the pictures do? Like, how do they allow you to kind of disrupt the story and tell it in a different way? Any questions?
Sir?
No.
We'll get around.
I'm taking it first. No, I'm disobedient. No, I guess this question is for Ken. Man, I was in prison and I came across an illustrated book on the philosophy of Heidegger. And it struck me so powerfully, and it's amazing. We have a prison writing program at Penn, and a lot of people look for philosophy as a way of explaining this sort of stuff. So I was wondering, to me, it's an act of disobedience. I don't mean to get directly attack you, but how do you feel that describing the thought process of this eminent philosopher in a visual form, like so many other people have tried to do, like this is a challenging task to make complex concepts accessible to people, that very act in an age where we live in sound bites and short attention span and, mocking bully culture, trolling. How did you get the bravery to walk down this path that is very against the tide?
Thank you. That's amazing. I would never have done it again. I would, because I love biography and I love artists, and I'm always like, why did the Beatles? Why were they so good? Like, why was B.B. King so good? And so I read a lot of biographies, and I think there's a connection between the life and the thought, the life and the art. Mm-hmm. And I just said there had to be a connection between this person's life and her art. And then I had to do some narrative things like putting it in the first person and allowing her to grow, to find these thoughts. But, I have some friends. Some of my best friends are professional philosophers. I dearly love them. I don't think any of them are here now. I cannot understand a word that they say when they tell me about what they're doing. But I, maybe like you or other people, I tend to think that, there's supposed to be some important stuff in here. So I wanted to kind of salvage it for the people, and I thought there had to be a way to do it. That was it,
You employ a really brilliant technique in here, which is the footnote. The footnotes have their own personality. I was like, the footnotes, I would sometimes just read just the footnotes just because I found them so enjoyable. When did it hit you that you needed to do that?
When I read David Foster Wallace and hated it. So I thought I'd give you guys a little pain. Actually, people in England are really freaked out by it. They're like, oh, I don't understand. Like, am I supposed to read the page? I'm like, I'm not telling you. And I love people in England. My wife is English. But I thought this would be another way. So that's kind of where, because I tend to be like, I like humor.
Yeah.
And I felt like some of the stuff, I couldn't be like really humorous about it. So that was where I allowed myself to kind of have my authorial voice a little bit. And also, you know, I teach, and I find that people who are like in their early 20s are hungry. Like, they should know who Kurt Weill was. They should know who Hannah Hoke was. How many people here know who Hannah Hoke? She was the inventor of collage, photo collage. We live in her world. So I wanted to do that. Thanks, yeah.
Hi. I had a question for Mira. Both of you started with a dialogue between of a child and the mind of a child. I think what's interesting is that the place of doubt and vulnerability in both, just even what you're talking about, a moment of not understanding something, and using that moment of not understanding a deep injustice and wanting someone to explain it. Both of you also seemed to then bring that to the forefront and why you wrote the book. I was really curious from what in writing the book you gathered in answering that original question and answering maybe better to your child how to navigate a world of hate and to navigate a world that is maybe dangerous or is dangerous to him.
Yeah, I kept telling myself to write this book because I was like, what are the answers? What are the answers? As a parent, you want to provide answers, right? And I kept telling myself, it will occur to you by the time you're done. Like, in the process of writing this, it will occur to you. The answers will, it will come from somewhere and it will occur to you, and you will be able to give it to him, like some golden knowledge that will keep him in a cocoon of whatever, that thing. And I was very surprised to find that I got to the end of the book and I was like, oh no, I don't have those answers. I think what I realized in writing the book is that was not the thing I was going to be able to give him. And the thing that I was probably going to be able to give him more than anything was the listening to his questions. But yeah.
You know, to give Hannah Arendt possibly the last word, I'm not sure, I don't want to cut this off, but she had a great quote that helped me, which is, and I think we can all, storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And, you know, I think that helped me a lot because I think your book is very meaningful, but I don't know, I can't, put it in a, in a little compartment.
Right.
So I think, you were kind of, we're both dealing with nonfiction in a way, but how do you make it mean something? And I guess that means connect. That's that connection thing you were talking about. So as usual, Hannah, hits it over the fence.
That was the one that made me cry on the subway.
Really?
Yeah, that's such a great.
Well, those were her, a lot of them were her words. I mean, when you've got somebody who can do that.
Yeah.
So.
I just was wondering, I guess specifically for Mira, you talked about the fact that you started writing this a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, I guess, for a little kid, about 3 years when you started, he's probably grown up a lot. And I'm just kind of curious, how these questions have changed and how that dialogue has changed now that your son is a little bit older.
Yeah, because he's 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a whole different person. It's really interesting. People in my publishing house just met him yesterday for the first time, and they're like, "Oh, you're like a teenager." I mean, he's 10 with a mustache, and he's different. He doesn't have the same. It was sort of like trying to explain racism to an alien. When he was 6, it was like, "Why do the humans do this?" And I was like, "I don't know, man." And now it's more complex. Now, actually, I've noticed that instead of asking questions, the other day he just, out of the blue, said, "Man, white people just hate us." And I was like, and it wasn't a question. That's the harder part, is when it's not a question. And so then I had to, then I had to ask the questions. Then I had to put it back in a place where we could ask the question behind it, right? Because the question behind it is like, why do they hate us? And then we have to ask who them is. And do you know what I mean? It's like all of the things of like, how do you break down that it's not a monolith? How do you not invalidate that feeling of like, yeah, you're feeling something. You're scared for reasons. They're real reasons. And how do we like parse that apart carefully so that you still have a place to stand where you can be a young man who's coming up in this world that's going to turn into a brown man that's treated in a certain way in this country? How do I position you to do that? I don't have an answer to that. All I have is that idea of let's find out what the question is.
So I was thinking of what other graphic novels or like visual books that incorporate visual media, I guess. And the ones that I could think of, this is, I guess, the ones that like made it into the mainstream, were Mouse from a long time ago, and then the biography of John Lewis this year, and Alison Bechdel's book Funhouse.
Yes.
And I was thinking that they all have, they all deal with really heavy topics, first of all, and questions of identity, and sort of in a biographical way, in a really personal way. And I was just wondering what your takes are on the connection between this sort of what we think of as like a lighthearted medium that's usually reserved for children, we associate with children, but dealing with such heavy topics. Like, is it a way to make it more digestible and like more manageable, or is it just a way to like sit with the image, like you were saying? You're just sort of confronting it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Just wondering what your thoughts.
I think you spoke to this a little bit in just the idea of that you can just do pictures tell you a different kind of story, right? Mm-hmm. But also, I understood that most of the people that I most want to read this book would never pick up a book about race ever in their lives. They would never do it. But I do notice that even when this book was, I had a galley copy at a party, and I noticed that people were stopping in the middle of the party to like slide it open, and then they were taking it and going and sitting in corners. And we were in the middle of a party, and I just had a moment where I was like, this is really helpful, because somebody who doesn't want to have this conversation, who really doesn't want to have this conversation, they're just going to have it sideways now. They're just going to sit with this book and have it because it is digestible, because it is, you're eavesdropping, right? That's the quality of this, is that you get to eavesdrop on these conversations. You don't have to confront them directly. You can be a part of this in a way that I hope will give people a foothold in to a place where they can find a place to stand for themselves. So that's what that is specifically for me, but I'm so curious about what you said.
I think we are visual. I mean, I say to people, like, you can be walking in Union Square, and there can be somebody on the other side of Union Square with a certain attitude, and their pants are cut a certain way, and you know who they are, and they're like the size of 2 pixels. We are highly visual, and now we live in Instagram land, which is like, forget it, But I don't think that's bad. I mean, I think visual communication is valid, So I've gotten that. I mean, when I started working on it, oh, you're doing a comic book about Hannah Arendt, isn't that disrespectful? It's not Archie. Nothing wrong with Archie, by the way. But it's just another means of communication. And actually, it's a very, very rich means of communication for me. Like, I'm really, really interested in what kind of shoes did she wear? Like, what were the heels like on attractive women's shoes in the 1920s when they didn't have the technology to make little fine heels? Like, that stuff is like really important to me. So, I think it's a great way, and it does, I agree, it's the sideways way in. So maybe, it's like, people like pictures. And the other thing I'll just add to it, I was talking to someone the other day. If you had to do your life by all the things that you've written down, it wouldn't necessarily be you. I mean, I've written like probably 50 letters. Half of them were from summer camp, some emails that are lost.
I think there's also there's also that like in the way that when you're listening to music, right? I always think that when you write a book, there's the book you write, and then there's the book everyone reads, and those are very different books. And so instead of writing one book, you have 20,000 out in the world because everybody has their relationship. But the really interesting thing to me about something visual is that it does work in the way that music does, meaning you can project so much of yourself into the lines and into the spaces. And I think that's just to me, that's just a different existence. It's just another way to get at a certain kind of emotionality, right?
Just going to ask you both one more question. If you could give us some information on upcoming publications, essays you may have out anywhere, and your next events in New York City.
I'm working on a book, as I said, involving interwar. It's a narrative nonfiction, and I don't want to talk too much about it. I just want to write it and do it. So look for some events late next year, hopefully. I can't think of my next event in New York. I've got a couple in Chicago coming up because I'm living there now, but I kind of bop back and forth.
My next event, so this is coming out in March, so that's one thing. But my next event here is actually for my novel. Do you guys know about this thing called the Bushwick Book Club? This is so cool. I didn't know about this either. Everyone should know about this. So it's this crazy thing where a group of musicians read a novel. They've all read my novel, and then they perform a night of songs that they've made up about that book. So they're doing that on November 28th. It's such a cool idea, right? Maybe it's only cool for me. Maybe everyone else is like, I don't care. But no, but I think if you have a relationship with a novel, how much fun is that to go listen to a bunch of songs about it? So that is the Bushwick Book Club, and where is the actual event? I'll have to tell you that later, or put it up on my page. Yeah, but look up Bushwick Book Club. There's only one.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out in this blizzard. What are there, 4 feet of snow outside?
Great. Thank you both so much.